I knew my family was built on lies long before the night my parents slapped me across the face, but I never imagined the entire room would go silent at the exact moment the truth finally chose to surface. The pain on my cheek was nothing compared to the realization burning in my pocket that night. Because upstairs, hidden behind a stack of notebooks, was the DNA file proving I was the only legitimate child in this family. And no one downstairs had any idea what kind of storm was coming for them. The slap landed with a sharp crack that echoed through the dining room. For a moment, I felt nothing except heat blooming across my skin. Then the room froze. Guests stared. No one moved. No one breathed. Even Lydia stopped pretending to smile. Mark lowered his hand slowly, as if he too was shocked by what he had just done. His breath came in short, hard bursts. His eyes narrowed, dark with a kind of simmering anger I had grown far too familiar with. "Sit down," he said. I did not sit. I touched the side of my face lightly, steadying myself. My legs trembled, but my heart did not. Something deeper took over, a kind of quiet clarity that pushed past the pain. But that moment was only the explosion. The fuse had been burning all evening. Just 2 hours earlier, I had walked home through the cold Tacoma drizzle after a long shift. My jacket was soaked, my shoes muddy, my hands stiff from carrying bags of trash to the dumpster. I pushed open the front door, expecting the usual silence. Instead, I stepped into warmth, voices, and the scent of rosemary chicken. The house buzzed with conversation. Coats hung on the banister. Someone laughed too loudly from the dining room. My stomach dropped. I'd forgotten Lydia's dinner night. "Ava," Lydia called out the moment she spotted me. Her voice was bright and sugary, but her eyes were sharp. "Come here." I walked toward her quietly. She looked me up and down with a practiced expression of disappointment. "Your father expects you to join us," she said as she smoothed my sleeve. "And please, try not to add to his stress tonight." I bit down a sigh. Every word she spoke to me felt like it hovered between instruction and warning. I followed her into the dining room. The long table glowed beneath the chandelier. Silverware aligned as if placed with a ruler. Guests dressed in crisp clothes smiled politely. But their eyes flicked over me the way people glance at something they are not sure belongs. Mark sat at the head of the table. He looked at me just long enough to acknowledge my presence before motioning to an empty seat at the far end. I sat quietly, trying to disappear. Lydia glided between guests, pouring wine, offering compliments, laughing softly. Her entire body language screamed perfection. She thrived in moments like this. Then she said loudly enough for half the table to hear that I had been distracted lately. Teenagers always glued to their phones. She laughed lightly, and the sound felt like a tiny needle sliding under my skin. I said nothing. My phone was in my pocket. I had not touched it. Dinner moved forward in a blur. People talked about promotions, ski trips, renovations. I pushed food around my plate, counting minutes until I could escape upstairs. Then it happened. I reached for the water pitcher, and Mark said, "Put your phone away." I froze. I whispered, "I am not using my phone." Lydia sighed dramatically. "She does it constantly. It is disrespectful." Heat crept up my neck. I shook my head gently. I said, "I'm not on my phone." Mark slammed his palm on the table. Glasses rattled. Utensils jumped. "Stop lying," he shouted. The guests fell silent. Someone stiffened in their seat. The air thickened around us, and before I saw it coming, before I could breathe or stand or speak, he struck me. The slap knocked the air from my lungs. For a moment, the room tilted. Then everything sharpened painfully into focus. My cheek burned. My ears rang. A woman whispered, "Oh, dear God." Someone else muttered enough. I straightened slowly, feeling something new settle into my bones. A steadiness I had not felt in years. Mark pointed at my chair. "Sit down." I looked him in the eyes, my voice a soft, steady blade. "I am not the one embarrassing this family." Lydia gasped, like the words physically struck her. Mark's jaw locked. A few guests exchanged uneasy looks, unsure whether to leave or pretend everything was normal. I stood. My chair scraped the floor. The sound made several people flinch. Without another word, I walked out of the dining room. My heart thudded, but my steps were steady. The hallway felt cold as I climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because I knew what the DNA results meant. Lighter because I finally understood the truth. Inside my room, I shut the door and locked it. My cheek throbbed, a deep hot ache, but my hands were cold, steady, certain. I walked to my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the thick envelope. Everything was inside it. Weeks of suspicion, late nights researching, whispered clues, swabs, samples, money I saved penny by penny, truth I did not want but needed. I sat on the edge of my bed and unfolded the paper. The words stared back at me with quiet finality. I was the only legitimate child in this family, not the baby Lydia adored, not the child Mark defended. Me, the girl they slapped, the girl they ignored, the girl they treated like a mistake. Downstairs, voices grew into chaos. Lydia crying, Mark shouting, guests whispering urgently, the entire illusion collapsing under its own weight. But this time, I was not the one breaking. I folded the paper calmly, pressed it to my chest, and whispered into the quiet room that the truth was coming. And this time, they would not silence me. I always thought rock bottom had a sound. Tonight it was the slap of a crumpled bill hitting the pavement beside my feet, while my stepmom's voice cut through the crowd at the Denver night market, telling everyone within earshot that I was a waste of a man, serving greasy street food from a metal box. I felt every stare land on me like stones, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. I am Caleb Morgan, 36 years old, owner of a beat-up silver food truck called Morgan's Grill, parked on a narrow corner near Santa Fe Avenue. I was wiping down the counter after the dinner rush when I heard her heels first. Sharp taps on asphalt. The same rhythm I used to hear through my bedroom wall when I was a kid and knew trouble was coming. Then she stepped into the light. Red blazer, immaculate hair, smile sharpened on purpose. Elaine, my stepmom. The woman who raised me with a hand on my shoulder only when she needed to push me in the direction she wanted. She stopped 2 feet from my truck, lifted her sunglasses even though it was past 9, and gave me that look of disappointment she had perfected years ago. Travis followed behind her, arms crossed, jaw clenched, wearing that fake leather jacket he bragged about getting on clearance. His eyes scanned my setup like he was inspecting a failed science project. Caleb still slinging burgers out of a tin can. Elaine said it like she was announcing the weather. Then she turned to the couple waiting in line and smiled as if she were doing them a favor. You folks should be careful. He never did finish anything he started. I kept my hands steady on the spatula, even though my stomach twisted. There were 5 customers watching, maybe more. I could feel phones come out. Just ignore her. Keep moving. Stay calm. I had repeated that mantra so many times, it had become muscle memory. What do you want, Elaine? My voice came out tired, not angry, and that probably irritated her more. Want? She laughed, loud enough to cut through the hum of the market. I want to understand how a grown man ends up back on the street selling cheap food like this after wasting every chance my late husband gave him. Hearing her say my father's name like that burned more than I expected. Harold had been gone since 2016, but the wound still lived under the surface. She had taken the house, the garage, everything he had worked for. I had tried to fight it, but I was young and broke, and she had lawyers. Tonight I was too exhausted to let the memory drag me under again. Customers shifted uncomfortably. One man stepped out of line and walked away. Travis smirked like he had scored a point. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of change and let it fall one coin at a time onto the sidewalk. "In case you need help paying rent on your little box." He said it slowly, like he wanted each word to slice. The coins rolled toward the gutter. I felt heat rising in my face. But I grabbed the grill tongs and kept flipping patties. If I stopped, I knew she would win. I had learned long ago that Elaine fed on reactions like oxygen. "You should have gone to college like Travis. You should have stayed at the garage. You should have kept that restaurant job. You should have listened to me." Her voice kept rising. "This is what happens when you ignore guidance, Caleb. You end up here, grease on your hands, and no real future." I had heard it all before. Every version of it. Since I was a teenager. Since she married my father and made sure I understood the difference between her son and me. She controlled the house. She controlled the money. After Dad died, she took the garage and sold half the equipment by the end of the week. I was given a box of tools and a notice to vacate. I had built my food truck years later with those same tools. A customer approached the window. A guy in a blue jacket who had been waiting patiently. He gave me a small nod. The kind you give someone when you want them to know they are not alone. I handed him his order and thanked him. That tiny moment of normalcy kept me standing. Elaine leaned closer. "You never learn, do you? This is all you will ever be." I felt something inside me tremble, just slightly, the way a bridge does before it collapses. I closed the food truck window just enough to create space between us. I told her I had work to finish and that she should go home. She stepped forward and tapped the glass with her nail. "Don't you walk away from me, Caleb Morgan." Not while I am talking. But her voice suddenly faded into the background. Because out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a figure sitting near the street lamp across from the market entrance. An older man, maybe early 70s. Beard gray and uneven, wearing a worn denim jacket. He had been there for days, drifting in and out, never asking for much. I had given him warm sandwiches whenever I had leftovers, and sometimes a bottle of water when the heat got rough. Tonight he was watching me closely, like he understood every word Elaine threw at me, like he had seen this scene play out 100 times. Elaine followed my glance and scoffed. "Look at that. Even the homeless crowd sticks around for a show." She raised her voice again. "Maybe you fit in better out here than you ever did with our family. Maybe this is exactly where you belong." Her words echoed louder than the chatter of the market, louder than the sizzle of the grill. Something inside me finally snapped. Not anger, not rage, just a drop of pure exhaustion. The kind that sinks into your bones and forces you to face the truth of how far you have fallen. I slid open the window and stared right at her. "Go home, Elaine." She froze for a beat, surprised I had said anything at all. Then she smirked, turned to Travis, and flicked her hand dismissively. "Come on, we are done here. Let him enjoy his kingdom of grease." They walked away slowly, making sure anyone within 15 feet had time to see their smug expressions. Customers whispered. The night market swallowed them into the crowd, but their voices seemed to linger even after they were gone. I leaned against the counter and let out a breath that tasted like metal. My hands were shaking. I hated that they were shaking. I hated that she still had that power over me after everything she had taken. The older man across the street stood up. For a moment I thought he was leaving, but he started walking toward my truck. His steps were slow, almost careful. When he reached the edge of the sidewalk, he paused and looked at me. And the way he looked made something in my chest tighten. Then he spoke for the first time since I had met him. "You do not deserve that, son." His voice was soft but steady, like someone who had lived long enough to recognize broken pieces in other people. I opened my mouth to answer, but a gust of cold wind rushed between us, carrying the smell of smoke from a nearby vendor and the lingering taste of humiliation on my tongue. I did not know what to say. I did not even know why this stranger bothered to say anything at all. He stepped closer, hands tucked into the sleeves of his jacket, eyes sharp beneath the tired surface. There is more to you than this moment. Do not let that woman convince you otherwise. Before I could ask him what he meant, a group of customers approached the truck, and the noise of the market rose again. When I looked back at the old man, he was already turning away, disappearing into the shadows near the parking lot like a ghost who knew exactly when to leave. I did not know it then, but that was the first crack in a door I never expected to open, and the night was far from over. I closed the service window for a moment to catch my breath. But the line of customers kept growing, and I forced myself back into motion. The night market was alive again. Music from a nearby booth thumping through the cool air, people laughing, vendors shouting out specials. It all felt distant, like I was moving underwater. My hands kept working, flipping patties, pressing buns, wrapping orders. But my mind was stuck on the old man and the way he looked at me. Not with pity, not with judgment, with something steadier, something I had not felt in a long time. By 10:30, the rush finally slowed. I wiped down the counters and switched off one of the griddles to cool it. The last two customers walked away with their orders, and I leaned out of the window to stretch my back. My shirt clung to me, damp with sweat even in the night air. I wanted to lock up early, but the market rules would not allow it. Vendors had to stay open until 11, no exceptions. I stepped outside the truck to dump a bucket of gray water at the disposal station. The pavement glistened under the lights, and the smell of roasted corn and propane tanks filled the air. I glanced toward the corner where the old man had stood earlier. He was gone. A strange disappointment settled in my chest. It made no sense. I barely knew him. Still, something about him lingered like a warning or a promise. When I returned to the truck, Travis was leaning against the side panel with two of his friends. They were loud and restless, the kind of energy that spelled trouble. Before I could speak, Travis leaned forward, breath sharp with cheap beer. Mom says you are losing it. Caleb, starting to crack. Makes sense. This whole food truck thing was never going to last. I walked past him without answering, climbed inside, and reached for the lock. He grabbed the door before I could close it and shoved it open again. My body tensed. He grinned like he wanted me to swing at him. Relax. We just want to talk. He said it with a laugh that told me he meant the opposite. His friend snickered behind him. I told him to leave. The words came out flat and tired. Or what? You going to fry me a burger? He pushed his foot onto the step of the truck. You think you are better than me because you play chef in a parking lot? I have seen enough men like him to know that there is no winning once they want a reaction. Silence only made him angrier. I stepped back inside the truck, keeping distance, one hand near a pan in case I needed to block a swing. He kept talking, letting every insecurity he had spill out as if it were gasoline. Dad always liked you more. You think I don't know that? You think I did not see the way he looked at you? Travis jabbed a finger at me. But look at you now. Nothing. A loser flipping patties while the city laughs at you. His words cut deeper than they should have. I had spent years trying not to compare myself to him. Years trying to ignore the whispers Elaine fed into his head. I looked past him toward the market exit and noticed a security volunteer walking the perimeter. I stepped toward the door. Get out of here, Travis. I am done for the night. He shoved the door again, harder this time, before the security volunteer noticed him and headed our way. Travis cursed under his breath and backed off. His friends followed, muttering. He pointed at me one last time as he left. This is not over, Caleb. Not even close. The volunteer asked if everything was all right. I nodded, even though my pulse was still racing. He walked on, but I could feel the eyes of several nearby vendors following the scene. I hated the attention. I hated the story this would become once the market gossip kicked in. When the clock finally hit 11, I shut down the generator and locked the truck for the night. The parking lot lights flickered overhead as vendors closed up. I slung my backpack over my shoulder and started toward my old pickup at the far end of the lot. My legs felt heavy, my mind heavier. Halfway there, I spotted the old man again. He was sitting on a low cement barrier near the dumpsters, hunched forward with his hands clasped. The way he sat, straight-backed despite his age, reminded me of my father. I walked toward him before I even decided to. He looked up as I approached. His eyes were pale blue, steady and unreadable. "Rough night, son." I let out a breath and nodded. Something about him made honesty easier. He studied me the way someone studies a map, like he was looking for the roads I had taken to end up here. "You run this truck alone." His tone was casual but curious. "Pretty much," I told him. "Help is expensive. Permits are expensive. Everything is expensive." He gave a soft chuckle. "That is how small businesses work. They take blood and sleep and whatever pride you have left in your pocket." His eyes softened. "Still, you show up." I leaned against the barrier beside him. There was a strange calm in talking to a man whose name I did not know. Maybe because he had nothing to take from me. Maybe because he saw me without trying to shape me into something else. "Earlier, you did not deserve what she said to you." He paused. That woman carries poison in her voice. People like that shrink everything they touch. I stared at the ground. She has been like that a long time. He did not ask questions. He did not offer empty advice. He just sat with me while the night air settled into silence. After a moment, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded napkin. He handed it to me. Inside was a small business card, worn around the edges, but clean. The print was simple, almost too simple for anything important. "Meet me at this address tomorrow at noon." He spoke in the same steady tone he had used all night. "If you want a way out of this hole, you are in. Come find me." I looked at the card. It listed an address in the Hilltop District, an area far above my pay grade, with old mansions and private driveways. No name, no title, just an address and nothing more. Why? The question slipped out before I could stop it. "Because you remind me of someone I used to know." He stood slowly, joints stiff but posture strong. Someone who worked harder than he had to and still got knocked down more times than he deserved. He stepped back toward the shadows of the alley, but turned once more. "Do not be late, Caleb." He said my name like he had known it for years. Then he disappeared around the corner, leaving me alone with the hum of retreating vendors and the sudden feeling that my life had just shifted, even if I could not see how yet. I stood there for a long moment staring at the card. The address glowed under the streetlight as if it had its own heartbeat. I slipped it into my pocket and walked slowly toward my truck, each step heavy with something I had not felt in a long time. Possibility? The next morning, the address in my pocket felt heavier than my keys. I woke before the sun even touched the blinds of my apartment. Paced the small kitchen, poured coffee I barely tasted, and tried to decide if meeting that old man made any sense. A normal person would have tossed the card and gone on with their day. But something in his voice stayed with me. The calm certainty. The way he seemed to see through every bruise and crack I tried to hide. By 10, I had convinced myself that showing up at noon was stupid. By 11:30, I was already in my truck driving toward Hilltop. The farther I went, the more the neighborhoods changed. Taco shops and corner stores faded into wide streets lined with old trees. Houses turned into estates with long brick drives and lawns trimmed flat enough to use as a putting green. I checked the address again, unsure if I had typed it wrong. But the numbers on the gate matched the card exactly. The gate was iron with tall posts wrapped in ivy. As I pulled up, a camera I had not seen tilted slightly, and a soft buzz sounded before the gate rolled open, like someone inside had been expecting me. I drove slowly up a long driveway until a large white house appeared from behind a row of pines. It looked like the kind of place that would require a team of people just to keep the windows clean. I parked near the steps and killed the engine. My heartbeat felt loud enough to shake the steering wheel. I stepped out and the air smelled different here. Cleaner somehow, mixed with watered grass and pine needles. Before I could knock, the door opened and a woman in her 30s stood there, wearing a navy suit and an expression colder than stone. "You are Caleb Morgan." It was not a question. "Follow me." She turned before I answered. I stepped inside and found myself in a foyer big enough to be a lobby. Everything was marble or polished wood. I felt underdressed in my faded jeans and thrift store jacket. She led me down a hallway toward a pair of tall doors. "He is waiting in the back study. Do not touch anything. Do not walk anywhere else." Her voice held the same energy as someone warning a kid not to break a priceless vase. Before I could respond, she pushed the study doors open and stepped aside. The room was lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling. A large window overlooked a garden where sunlight spilled across trimmed hedges and stone paths. That was not what held my attention, though. The old man from the night market sat in a leather chair behind a wide desk, cleaned up, shaved, dressed in a soft gray sweater. Without the grime and the heavy jacket, he looked almost like a different person. But his eyes were the same, steady and unreadable. "Come in, Caleb." He motioned with a faint smile. "Close the door." I closed it and walked in. My voice felt stuck somewhere behind my ribs. "You are not who I thought you were." He chuckled. "Most people are not. Sit." I sat across from him. The chair swallowed me like it had been built for someone far more important. He folded his hands and watched me for a moment. "My name is Leo Hartwell. Maybe you have heard it." I blinked. Hartwell, as in Hartwell Hospitality. The chain of hotels, the restaurants, the convention centers. Everyone in Denver knew the name. I stared at him, unsure what to say. "I see you recognize it." He gave a small nod. "Good. That saves us time. You were sitting outside the market like you were..." I stopped. It felt rude to finish the sentence, like I was homeless. "Yes." He said it calmly. "Sometimes I go out on my own without anyone knowing. My children do not approve, but they cannot stop me. You learn more about the world when no one recognizes you." Questions flooded my mind, but he raised a hand lightly. "We will get to all that. I brought you here for a reason. Last night I saw a man standing on the edge. Not weak, not broken. Just pushed to a point where the wrong word at the wrong time could have sent him wandering for years." I swallowed hard. His words cut deeper than Elaine ever had. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He turned his chair slightly toward the window. "Tell me about your stepmother." The request stunned me for a second. I looked at the floor, then forced myself to speak. "Elaine married my father when I was 13. Things were fine at first, but she never really saw me as family. After he died, she kept everything. The house, the garage, his shop equipment, all of it. She said it was hers by right. I tried to fight it, but I had no money, no lawyer. She made sure of that. I ended up renting a room above a tire shop for 2 years and working at a diner for scraps. She must have hurt you deeply. That surprised me. Most people skipped straight to the part where they told me to move on. She made sure I never forgot my place." I forced a breath. But I am not here to talk about her. You are here because of her. He tapped a finger on the desk. Last night, she tried to break you. People like her enjoy power. They feed on fear. You did not give her that. You held your head up. That is rare. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, but blinked it back. I did not want to look weak in front of him. He reached for a folder on the desk and slid it toward me. I hesitated before opening it. Inside were photographs of my food truck, printed documents, financial statements I did not remember sharing with anyone, and a list of vendors I worked with. I found these through public records and with the help of some friends. Your business is running, but not thriving. You are one bad month away from losing it. I nodded. He was not wrong. He leaned back. What I want to know is why you keep doing it. Why you fight so hard to stand on your own feet when life keeps trying to shove you into the dirt. The answer came out before I could stop it. Because I promised my father I would build something of my own. Something no one could take. Leo smiled. Small but sincere. Good. That is a reason worth standing behind. He stood and walked toward the window. For years I have been trying to build a new division under Hartwell Hospitality that supports small food businesses. Not franchises, not chains. People like you. People with skill but no backing. Most candidates fail within a week. They quit. They break. Last night I saw a man who did not break. My chest tightened. I did not understand where this was going. He turned to me. I want you to come work with me for a while. Let me see what you can do with real resources. Not scraps, not borrowed money. Real support. I stared at him, stunned. I do not have the education for that, or the experience. He waved off my objection. You have lived experience. You know how to survive. That teaches more than any certificate. I let out a shaky breath. What exactly are you offering? Come back tomorrow, noon. You will shadow me for the week. If you impress me, I have a proposition. If you do not, no harm done. You return to your truck, but at least you will know you tried. My pulse quickened. It all felt unreal. I looked down at my hands, stained faintly with grease no amount of scrubbing could erase. I wondered if he saw the doubt in my eyes. He stepped closer and placed a hand on the back of the chair. Let me be clear, Caleb. Opportunity rarely knocks twice, and when it does not always knock with patience. I felt something in my chest shift again. The same feeling from the night before, but louder now. All right? I said quietly. I will come tomorrow. Good. He returned to his seat. His eyes were thoughtful but sharp. And Caleb, do not mention this meeting to anyone. Not your friends, not your stepmother. Nobody. I nodded. The study doors opened behind me. The woman in the navy suit standing there like she had been listening the whole time. I walked out into the bright hallway and then into the sunlight. As I reached my truck, the weight in my pocket felt different. Not the heaviness of fear this time. Something closer to the first breath after being underwater too long. I did not know it yet. But the deeper I stepped into Leo Hartwell's world, the more violently my old life would push back. The air felt warmer the next morning, even though the forecast said a cold front was coming. I woke before my alarm, showered, shaved carefully for the first time in months, and put on the cleanest shirt I owned. It still had a faint stain near the hem from a spilled saucepan, but it was the best I could do. I stared at myself in the mirror longer than usual, wondering if a man like me belonged anywhere near a place like the Hartwell estate. The doubt sat heavy in my gut, but I pushed through it and left the apartment before I could talk myself out of going. Traffic on Colorado Boulevard crawled, cars merging with the same tired frustration that filled the morning air. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter each time a thought told me to turn around. By the time I reached the gate, my throat was tight and my palms were damp. The camera scanned me again. The gate opened. and a familiar pressure built in my chest. I drove in slowly and parked in the same spot near the steps. The front door opened before I reached it. This time it was a tall man with short dark hair and a sharp face. He looked me over like I was a stray dog dragged in off the road. "You are right on time." His tone made it clear he expected nothing less. "Come with me." He did not offer a name, and I did not ask. He led me down the same hallway, but turned left into a spacious room lined with long tables covered in blueprints, financial reports, digital tablets, and empty coffee mugs. People moved with purpose. Their conversations clipped and fast, the kind of tempo found in high-end firms where mistakes cost millions. The tall man stopped near a desk and finally spoke again. "My name is Owen Hartwell. Leo is my father. You will shadow him. You will listen more than you speak. You will follow instructions exactly as given." "Understood." I nodded, even though my stomach twisted. He studied me for a moment, then gestured toward the glass wall across the room. Behind it, I saw Leo sitting with two executives, reviewing what looked like a proposal. He looked nothing like the man I had met at the night market. No tired jacket, no stubble, no hint of the streets anywhere on him. The transformation still unsettled me. Owen motioned for me to enter. When I stepped inside, Leo lifted his eyes and gave a small smile. "Good, you made it. Sit." I did as he asked. He pushed a stack of papers toward me. "These are projections for a new project we are exploring. Street-based food concepts that can scale without losing authenticity. I want your eyes on it. I want to know what feels real and what feels manufactured." My throat tightened. "I do not think I am qualified for this." He shook his head. "You know more than you think. You live the reality we are trying to understand. That makes you more valuable than half the people in this room." The executives glanced at each other with subtle surprise, but said nothing. I studied the papers carefully. The proposals were sleek and polished, but some ideas were flawed. Too expensive, too complicated, too disconnected from what actually sells on a street corner. I told him honestly, "These would not work. Not this way. The pricing is wrong. The portions are unrealistic. And none of this reflects the actual workflow of a small truck." There was a moment of silence, and I felt heat rise in my neck. Maybe I should not have spoken. Leo only smiled wider. "See, that is exactly what I wanted." The meeting lasted an hour. I took notes, asked questions, and watched how Leo navigated a room. Confident, but never loud. Direct, but never cruel. The opposite of every authority figure I had grown up around. When it ended, he gestured for me to follow him into a quieter hallway. "You handled yourself well." He paused as we reached a large window that overlooked the garden. "Now, I want you to come with me to our downtown test kitchen. I want you to show me what you do on a normal day, but in a professional environment. I want to see your process, your efficiency, your instinct." I felt a jolt of nerves. I did not have professional equipment. I did not have anything except my hands and years of trial and error. But he was already walking, and I followed. We rode in a black SUV driven by a silent man who looked like he spent his weekends training for marathons. The ride downtown was quiet at first, until Leo spoke. "Tell me about your father." I inhaled slowly. He worked hard, harder than anyone I knew. He owned a small auto garage and spent most days under a hood or at the front desk juggling bills. He did not have much, but he gave what he could. After he died, everything went to my stepmother. She said it was what he wanted. I never believed her. Leo nodded lightly. "Did he teach you to cook?" "Not directly, but he taught me to respect work. All kinds of work. Food came later. Cooking made sense to me in a way nothing else did." He seemed to digest my words with care. Eventually he said, "People like your stepmother come from fear. Fear of losing control. fear of losing status, fear of being exposed. People who live off fear always cling to those beneath them. It is how they keep from facing their own emptiness. His words hit me harder than I expected. I looked out the window at the passing buildings. Maybe he was right. Maybe every insult Elaine ever threw at me was her way of choking down her own insecurity. It did not make the hurt smaller, but it made the shape of it easier to understand. We reached the test kitchen near 16th Street. The building was modern, glass front. The kind that looked like it belonged to a startup backed by investors. Inside, stainless steel counters gleamed under bright lights. Chefs moved with the controlled precision of people who had survived culinary school. When they saw Leo, they straightened slightly. He told them I was here to demonstrate my workflow. The head chef pointed toward an empty station stocked with basic ingredients. I tied an apron and took a breath. The room felt too clean, too perfect. I missed the hum of my truck, the hiss of propane, the controlled chaos I had shaped into muscle memory. Still, I started. Ground beef, seasoning, my usual blend. Patties formed by feel, heat steady, timing exact. The familiar rhythm settled my nerves. People gathered around as I cooked, some curious, some skeptical. I plated a sample and slid it across the counter. One chef tasted it and raised his eyebrows. Another nodded slowly. Leo stepped forward last, took a bite, and tapped the counter lightly. Good. Simple. Honest. You cook the way people want to eat. No pretense. Relief washed through me, warm and steady. Before I could say anything, the kitchen door opened and Owen walked in with a tablet in his hand. He did not look impressed. He looked irritated. I just received a call from a representative at Colorado Licensing. It seems someone filed complaints against your food truck this morning. Equipment safety, improper waste disposal, noise violations, all anonymous. My chest tightened painfully. That was not random. That was Travis. Owen looked at me with thinly veiled suspicion. If these complaints escalate, it could shut down your truck. That would reflect poorly on us if you are attached to this program. Leo lifted his hand and cut him off. Let me handle this. Owen pressed his lips together, but stepped back. Leo turned to me. You should know that stepping into my world will make the people in your old world desperate. Desperation makes people dangerous. I swallowed hard. My hands trembled slightly. I felt the weight of every insult Elaine had thrown yesterday, and the threat Travis whispered in the dark. Something was shifting again, and not all of it felt like progress. Leo rested a hand on my shoulder. Go home for today. Keep your head clear. Tomorrow we continue. I nodded slowly. As I stepped outside the building, the cold wind cut through my jacket, and I realized my life was not simply changing. It was beginning to collide with itself. The air felt warmer the next morning, even though the forecast said a cold front was coming. I woke before my alarm, showered, shaved carefully for the first time in months, and put on the cleanest shirt I owned. It still had a faint stain near the hem from a spilled saucepan, but it was the best I could do. I stared at myself in the mirror longer than usual, wondering if a man like me belonged anywhere near a place like the Hartwell estate. The doubt sat heavy in my gut, but I pushed through it and left the apartment before I could talk myself out of going. Traffic on Colorado Boulevard crawled, cars merging with the same tired frustration that filled the morning air. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter each time a thought told me to turn around. By the time I reached the gate, my throat was tight and my palms were damp. The camera scanned me again. The gate opened, and a familiar pressure built in my chest. I drove in slowly and parked in the same spot near the steps. The front door opened before I reached it. This time it was a tall man with short dark hair and a sharp face. He looked me over like I was a stray dog dragged in off the road. You are right on time." His tone made it clear he expected nothing less. "Come with me." He did not offer a name, and I did not ask. He led me down the same hallway but turned left into a spacious room lined with long tables covered in blueprints, financial reports, digital tablets, and empty coffee mugs. People moved with purpose, their conversations clipped and fast. The kind of tempo found in high-end firms where mistakes cost millions. The tall man stopped near a desk and finally spoke again. "My name is Owen Hartwell. Leo is my father. You will shadow him. You will listen more than you speak. You will follow instructions exactly as given." "Understood." I nodded, even though my stomach twisted. He studied me for a moment, then gestured toward the glass wall across the room. Behind it, I saw Leo sitting with two executives reviewing what looked like a proposal. He looked nothing like the man I had met at the night market. No tired jacket, no stubble, no hint of the streets anywhere on him. The transformation still unsettled me. Owen motioned for me to enter. When I stepped inside, Leo lifted his eyes and gave a small smile. "Good. You made it. Sit." I did as he asked. He pushed a stack of papers toward me. "These are projections for a new project we are exploring. Street-based food concepts that can scale without losing authenticity. I want your eyes on it. I want to know what feels real and what feels manufactured." My throat tightened. "I do not think I am qualified for this." He shook his head. "You know more than you think. You live the reality we are trying to understand. That makes you more valuable than half the people in this room." The executives glanced at each other with subtle surprise, but said nothing. I studied the papers carefully. The proposals were sleek and polished, but some ideas were flawed. Too expensive, too complicated, too disconnected from what actually sells on a street corner. I told him honestly, these would not work. Not this way. The pricing is wrong. The portions are unrealistic. And none of this reflects the actual workflow of a small truck. There was a moment of silence, and I felt heat rise in my neck. Maybe I should not have spoken. Leo only smiled wider. "See? That is exactly what I wanted." The meeting lasted an hour. I took notes, asked questions, and watched how Leo navigated a room. Confident but never loud. Direct but never cruel. The opposite of every authority figure I had grown up around. When it ended, he gestured for me to follow him into a quieter hallway. "You handled yourself well." He paused as we reached a large window that overlooked the garden. "Now I want you to come with me to our downtown test kitchen. I want you to show me what you do on a normal day, but in a professional environment. I want to see your process, your efficiency, your instinct." I felt a jolt of nerves. I did not have professional equipment. I did not have anything except my hands and years of trial and error. But he was already walking, and I followed. We rode in a black SUV driven by a silent man who looked like he spent his weekends training for marathons. The ride downtown was quiet at first until Leo spoke. "Tell me about your father." I inhaled slowly. He worked hard, harder than anyone I knew. He owned a small auto garage and spent most days under a hood or at the front desk juggling bills. He did not have much, but he gave what he could. After he died, everything went to my stepmother. She said it was what he wanted. I never believed her. Leo nodded lightly. "Did he teach you to cook?" "Not directly, but he taught me to respect work. All kinds of work. Food came later. Cooking made sense to me in a way nothing else did. He seemed to digest my words with care. Eventually, he said, "People like your stepmother come from fear. Fear of losing control, fear of losing status, fear of being exposed. People who live off fear always cling to those beneath them. It is how they keep from facing their own emptiness." His words hit me harder than I expected. I looked out the window at the passing buildings. Maybe he was right. Maybe every insult Elaine ever threw at me was her way of choking down her own insecurity. It did not make the hurt smaller, but it made the shape of it easier to understand. We reached the test kitchen near 16th Street. The building was modern, glass front, the kind that looked like it belonged to a startup backed by investors. Inside, stainless steel counters gleamed under bright lights. Chefs moved with the controlled precision of people who had survived culinary school. When they saw Leo, they straightened slightly. He told them I was here to demonstrate my workflow. The head chef pointed toward an empty station stocked with basic ingredients. I tied an apron and took a breath. The room felt too clean, too perfect. I missed the hum of my truck, the hiss of propane, the controlled chaos I had shaped into muscle memory. Still, I started. Ground beef, seasoning, my usual blend. Patties formed by feel, heat steady, timing exact. The familiar rhythm settled my nerves. People gathered around as I cooked, some curious, some skeptical. I plated a sample and slid it across the counter. One chef tasted it and raised his eyebrows. Another nodded slowly. Leo stepped forward last, took a bite, and tapped the counter lightly. Good. Simple, honest. You cook the way people want to eat. No pretense. Relief washed through me, warm and steady, before I could say anything. The kitchen door opened and Owen walked in with a tablet in his hand. He did not look impressed. He looked irritated. I just received a call from a representative at Colorado Licensing. It seems someone filed complaints against your food truck this morning. Equipment safety, improper waste disposal, noise violations, all anonymous. My chest tightened painfully. That was not random. That was Travis. Owen looked at me with thinly veiled suspicion. If these complaints escalate, it could shut down your truck. That would reflect poorly on us if you are attached to this program. Leo lifted his hand and cut him off. Let me handle this. Owen pressed his lips together, but stepped back. Leo turned to me. You should know that stepping into my world will make the people in your old world desperate. Desperation makes people dangerous. I swallowed hard. My hands trembled slightly. I felt the weight of every insult Elaine had thrown yesterday and the threat Travis whispered in the dark. Something was shifting again, and not all of it felt like progress. Leo rested a hand on my shoulder. Go home for today. Keep your head clear. Tomorrow we continue. I nodded slowly. As I stepped outside the building, the cold wind cut through my jacket, and I realized my life was not simply changing. It was beginning to collide with itself. I drove back toward my apartment with the engine humming under me and the cold air slipping through the cracked window. My mind kept jumping between the test kitchen and Owen's expression. The suspicion in his eyes. The complaints filed that morning. By the time I parked outside my building, the sun had dipped behind the skyline, and a pale orange light stretched across the walls of the lot. I sat there for a long moment, gripping the wheel, trying to steady my breathing. The day had started with hope, but it was ending with the familiar weight of trouble pressing against my ribs. When I stepped out of the truck, I noticed a piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper. At first I thought it was a parking warning, but when I pulled it free, I saw that someone had scribbled in thick black marker. Keep pretending you are someone. We will see how long that lasts. The handwriting was messy, rushed, but I knew it. Travis? The paper smelled faintly of beer. My stomach tightened. He had been here. He knew where I lived. I scanned the lot, half expecting him to crawl out from behind a car, but no one was around. A couple walked their dog near the sidewalk. A neighbor hauled groceries upstairs. Everything looked normal except for the cold sweat breaking down my back. I crumpled the note and shoved it into my pocket. I told myself I would deal with it later, after food and rest. But even then I knew that was a lie. Upstairs, my apartment felt smaller than usual. I dropped my keys on the counter and paced the narrow space between the kitchen and the couch. The noise violations, the equipment complaints, the waste disposal accusations, they all pointed to one thing. Someone wanted my truck gone. Someone wanted to force me back to the bottom. The kind of tactic that hits you where you make your living. The thought made my jaw clench. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name of someone I had not called in months. Donna Reyes. We grew up in the same neighborhood, shared the same bus stop as kids. She had become a paralegal at a firm downtown and always knew her way around paperwork. I hit call before I lost the nerve. She answered on the third ring. "Caleb, it has been a while." Her voice steadied me a little. "Hey, sorry for calling out of the blue. I need some advice." "About what?" "Somebody filed complaints against my truck today. Multiple ones. All at once." She paused, and I could hear the clicking of a keyboard. Anonymous complaints are usually red flags. "Caleb, someone is targeting you." "Yeah, I know." I heard her take a breath. "Come by my office tomorrow morning, 8:30. Bring whatever notices you get. We can figure out what is real and what is garbage." "Thanks, Donna." "Of course. We look out for our own." Her tone softened. "And Caleb, be careful." Her concern followed me even after I hung up. I reheated leftover pasta and sat on the couch, feeling my nerves buzz under my skin. Part of me wanted to call Leo and tell him everything. But the other part feared looking weak in front of him. He had given me an opportunity I had never been offered before. I did not want my past dragging me out of it before I had even begun. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I heard was a hard knock at the door. My pulse spiked. I checked the clock. It was nearly 10. No one visited me this late. Another knock sounded, louder this time. I walked slowly toward the door and peered through the peephole. It was the old woman from downstairs. Mrs. Denton, small frame, gray hair pulled back tight, floral jacket. She knocked again, impatience showing in every line of her posture. I opened the door an inch. "Everything okay, Mrs. Denton?" she huffed. "There was a man outside earlier, asking about you, looking at your truck, wearing some cheap leather jacket. He smelled like trouble." My chest tightened. "Did he say anything?" She frowned. "Just asked which unit you lived in. I told him nothing and sent him off. You need to watch out. Men like that do not show up for friendly reasons." I thanked her and assured her I would keep the building manager informed. She nodded firmly, the kind of nod old women give when they decide they are personally responsible for saving your life, then shuffled toward the elevator. I closed the door and locked both deadbolts. I checked the windows. I paced again. My mind replayed everything from the last 2 days. Elaine's voice, Travis's threats, Owen's warning about desperation. I knew something was coming, something bigger than a cruel note or a handful of complaints. When I finally forced myself to lie down, the room felt too quiet. I stared at the ceiling while the headlights from passing cars crawled across the walls. I thought about my father and the promise I had made at his graveside. Build something no one can take. For the first time, I wondered if I was failing him, if I was letting the ghosts of that house win again. Sleep came in pieces. I woke several times to sounds that were not there. When my alarm rang at 6 the next morning, I felt like I had barely rested. I showered, dressed fast, grabbed the folder of documents, and headed out the door. The lot looked mostly empty except for a sanitation truck idling near the exit. I approached my food truck slowly, dread curling in my gut. When I reached it, the sight hit me square in the chest. A bright orange violation sticker was slapped across the side panel near the serving window. Unsafe equipment, pending inspection, temporary closure. My hands curled into fists. My throat burned. This was not from the city. They would never place a sticker like that without contacting me first. Someone printed this. Someone wanted me to think the city had shut me down. Someone wanted to spook me into closing. And I knew exactly who that someone was. I yanked the sticker off and tossed it into the truck. I sat inside the cab, gripping the wheel as rage simmered through me. I could not let Travis push me out of my own life. Not now. Not when I finally had a chance at something better. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your truck before you drive it. A cold shiver crept down my spine. I stepped out quickly and circled around the hood, checking under the frame. Nothing. I popped the hood open and scanned the engine compartment. Then I froze. A rag soaked in oil had been stuffed near the exhaust manifold. If it had stayed long enough, if the heat had climbed high enough, it could have caught fire. Not guaranteed, but enough to cause damage, enough to scare me. I pulled it free and threw it onto the ground. My breath shook. This was not a prank anymore. This was a warning. A line being crossed. I checked my surroundings again, feeling exposed in the empty lot. My hands trembled as I closed the hood. I got into the truck and locked the doors. I sat there, breathing through the fury building in my chest. I had to move. I had to get to Donna's office before anything else happened. As I pulled out of the lot, I caught movement in my mirror. A dark sedan parked across the street. Windows tinted, engine running. No plates on the front. It did not follow me, not yet. By the time I reached downtown, my nerves felt stretched thin. I parked in a public garage and hurried across the street to the firm where Donna worked. The lobby smelled of old carpet and coffee. I took the elevator up, and when the doors opened, she was already standing there with a folder in her hands. "You look like hell, Caleb. Rough morning?" She nodded. "Come on, we need to talk." I followed her into the small conference room. She shut the door behind us, her expression tight with concern. "I have been digging. You are not dealing with simple harassment. You are dealing with someone willing to break the law to force you out. These complaints, these fake closures, that is strategy. Someone wants your truck shut down before it becomes profitable." My throat tightened. Why would anyone go this far? She lifted a page filled with public records and property filings. "Because your stepmother has more to lose than you realize." I felt the room tilt slightly. Donna stepped closer and placed the documents on the table. "Caleb, the garage your father owned, the one she sold, that sale was not legal. And there is more. Much more." Her voice lowered. "Your stepmother has been hiding something for years." The room fell silent as her words sank into me, heavy and sharp, and I felt the world I had known begin to crack in ways I had never imagined. I stared at the papers on the table, the words on them shifting slightly, as if my eyes refused to accept what they were seeing. Donna tapped the corner of one page gently, her expression steady, but her voice low. "Your stepmother did not have the legal right to sell that property after your father died. According to this, Caleb, the deed never transferred to her. She forged signatures. She filed altered documents." My stomach dropped. I sank slowly into the chair, feeling the weight of the revelation settle into my bones. For years I had believed she simply moved faster than I could, that she was cold but smart, cruel but careful. I never imagined she had broken the law to strip my father's legacy from me. Donna sat across from me. "Caleb, this is not a simple mistake. This is criminal fraud. If we bring this forward, she could face felony charges, but this will not be clean. It will dig up everything. You need to be ready for that." I rubbed my hands together to steady them. Why would she risk that? Why go that far? Donna leaned back slightly, scanning the file. Money, control, image. Pick one, pick all. And now she is doubling down because you are coming up again. People like her do not accept losing ground. I exhaled slowly. What about Travis? Could he be involved? Donna hesitated before nodding. There are calls between him and a known consultant who specializes in filing nuisance complaints. That does not prove anything by itself, but it paints a picture. My jaw clenched hard enough for the muscles to ache. My family had not just turned their backs on me. They had torn the floor from under me and watched me drop. Donna continued. We can pursue a civil suit, possibly a criminal complaint, but we need more evidence. We need someone who can confirm this tampering happened. I thought of the garage, the smell of oil and old paint. My father's hands stained from years of work. I felt a sharp ache in my chest. If he were alive, none of this would have happened. He would have fought until his last breath. What do you need from me? My voice felt distant, like the words came from someone behind me. Donna folded her hands. For now, stay quiet. Do not confront her yet. Let me pull records, contact the right people discreetly, and get clarity. As soon as she realizes she is exposed, she will panic. And people who panic do stupid things. I nodded even though my pulse was pounding. She closed the folder and pushed it toward me. Take this copy. Look it over when you're ready. Just do not let her or Travis know you have it. I thanked her, stood up, and left the office with the folder pressed against my side like it was a fragile thing that might dissolve if I loosened my grip. The cold morning air hit me as soon as I stepped outside. I breathed it in, sharp and hard, to steady myself. The city buzzed around me. Cars lined up at lights, people rushing to work, the sound of someone laughing across the street. It felt strange, like the world was unchanged while mine was shifting under my feet. I reached the parking garage and got into my truck. I sat there for several long minutes, staring at the steering wheel. Every memory of Elaine flickered through my mind. Her voice, her smirk, the way she walked into the market as if she owned every inch of the space around her. All that confidence, that superiority. It was built on lies. The realization should have felt satisfying, but instead it burned in a way that made me feel hollow. I turned the key, started the engine, and began driving toward Hartwell Plaza. Leo would ask me how the morning went. Owen would watch me for signs of weakness. I did not know what I would tell them. I barely knew what to tell myself. Halfway there, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. For a second, my chest tightened. I answered without thinking. You think you can dig into our business? The voice was low, rough, muted by the sound of wind in the background. My grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? Silence for a beat. Then a laugh. A familiar one. Travis, he was enjoying this. You had a little visitor outside your apartment yesterday. He said it with the calm of someone discussing the weather. That old lady downstairs does not know when to mind her business. Next time she will not see me coming. Heat surged through me. Leave her out of this. She has nothing to do with it. Everything has to do with it now. Caleb, you made it that way. You want to start digging. You better be ready to get buried. The line went dead. I sat there gripping the phone until my knuckles ached. Panic rose in my throat. Not for myself, but for the people who lived around me. Travis had never been stable. Now he was cornered, angry, and stupid enough to do something reckless. I drove the rest of the way with my chest tight and my mind racing. When I reached Hartwell Plaza, the security guard recognized me and waved me through the entrance. I took the elevator up. As the doors opened, I saw Owen standing near the reception desk. phone in hand, posture stiff. He noticed me and ended the call. "Come with me." His tone carried no patience. I followed him into a conference room where Leo stood near the window. He turned as we entered and studied my face with that same calm intensity he always had. "Rough morning, Caleb," that was one way to put it. I set the folder on the table and sat down. I did not know where to begin, but the words came quietly. Someone went after my truck. Someone filed complaints to get it shut down. Someone tampered with the engine. And someone came to my apartment building. Owen's jaw tightened. "Did you see who—" I shook my head. "But I know who it was." Leo stepped forward, rested both hands on the back of the chair across from me. That is not a small accusation. I opened the folder Donna had given me and slid one of the pages toward him. The one showing the forged deed transfers. He looked over it slowly. Expression unreadable. "This is serious. Caleb," I nodded. "I know." Owen spoke next. "If this is correct, your stepmother could face years in prison. Fraud of this level is not something prosecutors ignore." My throat felt tight. She took everything from me after my father died. She made sure I could not fight back. I did not know she had broken the law to do it. Leo's gaze softened slightly. "And now she sees you rising again. People like her do not tolerate that. Not when their power depends on your failure." The silence stretched long enough that I had to look away. Leo finally spoke again. "You need protection. You need legal support. And you need leverage. Your stepmother has played her hand. Now you must play yours." I swallowed hard. What does that mean exactly? It means your life is changing faster than the people around you can control. That makes you a threat in their eyes. And threats are not ignored. He paused. "But you are not alone anymore." The weight of those words hit deeper than I expected. Owen added quietly, "We will look into the complaints, into the tampering, into anything else that points back to this. If there is evidence, we will find it." A sharp knock sounded at the door. One of the assistants stepped inside, holding a phone. "Sir, you need to take this. It is urgent." Leo excused himself and stepped out into the hallway. Owen and I remained in the quiet room. Tension thick in the air. I looked at the documents spread across the table and felt a familiar ache deep in my ribs. My father had tried to leave something for me, a foundation, a future, and she had stolen it without hesitation. Now it was all unraveling, and part of me finally wanted it to. Leo returned after several minutes, his expression harder than when he had stepped out. He closed the door quietly behind him and rested both hands on the back of a chair before speaking. "Something has shifted." That was the head of security at Hartwell Plaza. "They intercepted a call this morning. Someone has been trying to get information about your schedule. Someone asked when you arrive, when you leave, which entrances you use. They claimed to be from city licensing, but the caller ID was spoofed." A chill ran through me. Travis. It had to be. I felt the familiar rise of anger, sharp and hot in my chest, but under it was something else. A cold awareness that this was escalating into something I could not brush aside anymore. Leo studied my face. "We will increase security around you. For now you move with our drivers. You do not arrive or leave alone. Understand?" I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle on me. He continued, "This is not about intimidation anymore. This is about control. Someone is desperate. Someone knows they are losing ground." Owen crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "We have already pulled surveillance from the market area and your apartment building. If Travis is involved, we will find the proof. And when we do, he will regret crossing into criminal territory." I did not answer. I could barely think. My life had shifted from frying burgers in a parking lot to being briefed like I was suddenly someone worth targeting. It did not feel real. Leo motioned to the chair beside him. Sit for a moment, Caleb. I sat, my hands clasped together. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. There is something else you should know. This process, this path you are on, is not just about saving your truck. It is about rebuilding what was stolen from you. But rebuilding always brings resistance from those who benefited from your downfall. His words echoed in the quiet room, steady and heavy. Before I could speak, the door opened again, and the assistant who had delivered the phone earlier stepped inside with a cautious look. "Sir, the district attorney returned your call. He wants to speak about the property documents." Leo nodded and dismissed him. He turned back to me. Donna was correct. Your stepmother's actions were not only unethical, they may have been illegal. The district attorney wants to review the evidence. If it holds, everything she has built on those lies will come down. My chest tightened. Elaine had taken everything after my father died. The house, the garage, every piece of him she could turn into cash. Now the truth was crawling back to the surface, steady and unstoppable. Leo softened slightly. But listen to me carefully. People cornered by the truth tend to lash out. They reach for anything sharp. You need to be prepared. Prepared for what? My voice was quiet, rough. He answered without hesitation, retaliation. A knock sounded again, but this time there was urgency in it. Owen moved to open the door, and a security officer stepped in. Tall, broad-shouldered, breathing slightly heavier than normal. "Mr. Hartwell, we have a situation." He handed Owen a tablet. Owen's eyes narrowed as he scrolled. He passed it to Leo. I leaned forward, pulse quickening. "What is it?" Leo studied the screen, then turned it toward me. On the display were still images taken from a security camera. Grainy, but clear enough. My food truck, parked outside my apartment. A figure crouched beside the rear wheel. A hood pulled low, a jacket I recognized immediately. The cheap leather, the worn cuffs. My gut twisted. "Travis?" Leo tapped the screen lightly. "He was attempting to damage your axle. If he had succeeded, the truck could have flipped at highway speed. For a moment I could not breathe." The folder in front of me blurred. All the anger from the last weeks surged up at once. But now there was fear mixed into it, cold and heavy. Owen spoke. "We tracked the sedan he was driving. It belongs to a man known to law enforcement for petty theft and intimidation jobs. Travis is using him for errands he does not want tied to his own name." I pressed a hand to my forehead. This is insane. He is losing control. Leo shook his head. He lost control a long time ago. Now he is acting out of instinct, not reason. The officer stepped forward. "Do you want us to involve the police formally?" Leo looked at me, letting the decision rest on my shoulders. My heartbeat thudded against my throat. Calling the police would set things in motion I could not stop. Not just for Travis, but for Elaine, for everything tied to them. I finally said quietly, "Not yet. Not until we know exactly how deep this goes." Owen did not hide his frustration. "Caleb, he tampered with your vehicle. He is escalating, and he will not stop on his own. I know. But if we move too early, Elaine will bury anything that can destroy her. I need the truth to come out fully, not halfway." Leo watched me closely, and after a long moment he nodded. "Very well. But you must understand that from this point forward, every step matters." The room fell silent. Outside the window, the traffic moved along the downtown streets, distant and unaware of the war unfolding inside my life. Leo straightened. "There is something else I want to discuss with you. Tomorrow you will join me in reviewing a proposal for the Street Concepts Division. If things continue well, there may be a role for you. A significant one." I blinked. "A role? What kind of role?" Leo did not smile. but there was warmth behind his eyes. Something close to a beginning. One that could reshape your future. But you must stay focused. The people trying to drag you down depend on your distraction. Do not give them what they want. I nodded slowly. I would not let Travis or Elaine steal another inch of my life. A sudden vibration buzzed inside my pocket. My phone. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. A message from an unknown number. The same format as before. You should watch your back. You do not know who is coming. My pulse jumped. I turned the screen so Leo and Owen could see. For the first time since I met him, Owen's face changed completely. His voice dropped to a clipped command. We are tracing that number now. Leo looked at the security officer. Increase surveillance around Caleb's apartment, 2 guards at minimum, and notify property management discreetly. The officer nodded and left quickly. Leo turned back to me. You need to stay somewhere else tonight. I shook my head. I do not want anyone in my building dragged into this. That is exactly why you are not going back there. He stepped closer. You will stay at one of our secured residences. No discussion. I wanted to argue. The part of me that spent years taking care of myself wanted to push back, but the images of Travis crouched by my truck replayed in my mind, sharp and unforgiving. I let out a slow breath. All right. Owen gathered the remaining documents while Leo rested a hand briefly on my shoulder. His voice softened again. This is the storm before the calm. Caleb, you hold steady now. The truth is almost in reach. Almost in reach. The words sank into me like a weight and a promise. But the storm was far from over. By the time we stepped out of the conference room, the hallway felt colder, the lights brighter, the world suddenly sharper at the edges. Whatever was coming next was already moving toward me. The secured residence was a townhouse, tucked behind a row of trimmed hedges in a quiet neighborhood on the south end of Denver. The ride there was silent, except for the hum of the SUV engine. 2 security guards followed in a second vehicle. When we pulled into the driveway, the driver handed me a key fob and pointed to the entryway before heading back to rejoin the convoy. I stepped inside and the house felt empty in a peaceful way. Clean lines, warm lights, a stocked fridge, a bedroom that did not creak with every step. It was the kind of place that made you breathe differently. I set my bag on the counter and sat on the couch. Everything felt unreal. My father's stolen property, Travis stalking me, Leo stepping into my life like some strange force of nature. It was too much to process in one night. So I leaned back and let the silence steady me. The next morning, a black SUV picked me up at 7. The driver nodded when I climbed in and handed me a coffee without saying a word. It tasted better than anything I had made for myself in weeks. We drove toward Hartwell Plaza as the city woke up. Sunlight climbing between the buildings like a slow promise. I watched pedestrians bundled in jackets, coffee lines forming outside small shops, construction workers prepping equipment. Normal life moving on while mine twisted into something else entirely. At the office, Owen was waiting near the elevators. His usual impatience softened for once. We have new information. Come with me. We went into a conference room where a screen displayed several documents and surveillance stills. Leo entered a moment later, carrying a manila envelope. He set it on the table and took a seat. Before we begin, Caleb, I need you to know that what we uncovered is serious, not just for your stepmother, but for you. What was taken from you was not just property, it was inheritance, legacy, identity. He opened the envelope and slid out a document. It was a copy of my father's original will, filed 15 years ago. My heartbeat quickened when I saw his signature. I reached for the paper slowly. I read it once, then again, and my breath caught. My father left the garage to me, not to Elaine, not to anyone else. to me. Leo let the weight of that sink in. The forged deed was designed to erase that. Everything she did afterward depended on hiding this. The room felt smaller suddenly. I stared at the will. My father's handwriting looping across the page. Steady and familiar. A part of me wanted to break down right there. But another part rose up inside me, stronger than the fear that had lived in my chest for years. What happens now? Leo exchanged a look with Owen. Now the district attorney has grounds to open a formal investigation. With the forged filings and the fraudulent sale, combined with the harassment and intimidation, the case against her and Travis is strong. I swallowed once, hard, and Travis? Owen clicked to the next screen. It showed the footage of him near my truck. As of this morning, he's in custody. The police found items in his apartment that tie him to the attempted sabotage. I let out a slow breath I had not realized I was holding. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Something deeper. Relief mixed with sorrow for what family had become. Leo continued. As for your stepmother, she will be facing charges as well. She is already in questioning. Her attorney contacted us asking for negotiation. But I declined. This needs to run its course. I nodded. My voice felt quiet. She chose this path. Leo leaned forward slightly. She did. And now you must choose yours. He tapped the table gently. With this documentation, you have the right to reclaim what was stolen. The garage land still exists. The property may have changed hands, but the fraud invalidates the sale. You can fight for compensation or full restitution. Hearing those words felt like stepping out of a storm into still air. For years, the loss of the garage had sat inside me like a bruise that never healed. Now there was a way to fix it. To stand up in a way my father would have expected of me. What do you want me to do? My voice felt steadier than before. Leo smiled slightly. That is not for me to answer. But know this. Your father intended for you to have a foundation, a place to build from. Now you can honor that intention. He stood, signaling the meeting was done. Before walking out, he paused at the door and looked back at me. One more thing. Your work these last few days has shown me something rare. You have instinct, heart, and grit. Qualities people in my world often pretend to have, but rarely do. Because of that, I want you to consider joining me full-time, not as an assistant, not as a trainee, as a partner in shaping the Street Concepts division. My chest tightened. Partner. Leo nodded. You would oversee development for the Denver sector. You would help design the program for small food businesses. You would have equity, real ownership. This is not charity. Caleb, this is investment. In you. For a moment I could not speak. I thought of my father teaching me to fix engines in the garage. I thought of the night market. The humiliation, the fear, the anger. And then I thought of the life I could build now. Something solid. Something mine. I finally said, I want to do it. Leo's smile grew warm. Genuine. Good. We will finalize everything soon. But for today, take the afternoon for yourself. You have earned it. He left the room with Owen close behind him. I sat alone for several minutes staring at the documents, the surveillance stills, the will that had been buried for so long. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from release. The truth had finally surfaced, and I had survived long enough to see it. When I stepped out of the building later, the wind brushed cold across my face. But it did not sting the way it once had. It felt like an open road, waiting. I drove toward the edge of the city where the old garage once stood. The building was gone now, replaced by a parking lot for a hardware store. But the land was still familiar. I parked and stepped out. Standing at the edge of the asphalt, cars came and went. People walked by, unaware of what this place meant. I closed my eyes and pictured my father wiping his hands on a rag, looking up at me with that tired, proud smile he used to have. I whispered into the air, "I am getting it back. Dad, all of it." The wind carried the words away, but they left a warmth inside me that did not fade. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I climbed back into my truck and started the engine. Whatever came next, I was no longer running from anything. Not from the past, not from fear, not from the people who wanted me small. I was building something now, something no one could take. And for the first time in years, I felt ready for it. If you want to hear more stories like this, follow along and leave your thoughts. Your support helps keep these real-life journeys alive and gives me the chance to share the next chapter with you.